The afternoon sun filtered through the studio's tall windows, casting streaks of soft amber across the floor. Scarlett arrived before anyone else, as she often did, and positioned herself in the quiet center of the room. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the subtle hum of the space, the lingering pulse of yesterday's rhythm work. The silence wasn't empty. It held memory. It held progress. It held potential. She inhaled slowly, grounding herself. Today's focus was connection, not the obvious kind, not the kind that relied on closeness or touch, but the invisible thread that tied one movement to another, one dancer to the next, one breath to a shared presence. Amina stepped in softly, as though she didn't want to disturb the air's stillness. She placed her sketchbook down with care and joined Scarlett at the center. No words were exchanged at first, they didn't need to be. The quiet held understanding. Finally, Amina spoke, her voice warm and thoughtful. "I refined the transitions," she said. "The gestures now lead into each other more naturally. It feels like water shaping itself rather than us forcing the flow." Scarlett smiled gently. "Perfect. That's exactly the direction." Amina's smile was subtle but bright with quiet confidence. Courtney arrived next, carrying a handful of light scarves dyed in soft, natural tones. These fabrics weren't meant to decorate or distract, but breathe. When Courtney let them fall onto the floor, they didn't land, they floated, settling like petals. Scarlett lifted one between her fingers, the fabric delicate and weightless. "These will highlight motion, not control it," she said. Courtney nodded. "I wanted the movement to leave traces in the air. Like memory made visible." Scarlett's approval was silent and full. Courtney felt it. That was enough. Daniel entered with a different kind of pacing today, slower, more attentive, more tuned. His usual precision had softened into something that felt human, warm, and settled. He brought no folder today. No notes. Just presence. He greeted the group with quiet warmth and stood near the center, allowing the others' energies to guide his own. Caleb arrived last, steady and quiet, but today he didn't stay at the edges. He walked toward the group and took a place near the circle, without words or announcement. It took no explanation. The group simply made space. Scarlett guided them gently. "Today, we focus on connection," she said softly. "Not through touch. Not through steps. But through awareness. Feel the space between movements. Feel how one gesture leads to another. Let the transitions speak." She motioned for them to stand in a loose formation. "Close your eyes if it helps." The dancers closed their eyes. Breath aligned. The room felt like it was holding its own quiet inhale. "Begin with a simple motion," Scarlett instructed, "something small and natural. Then allow that motion to inspire the next, without planning. Let your body speak to the space." The movement began slow. Barely noticeable. Organic. Amina's wrist turned slightly, a soft arc through air. May's shoulder dipped in response, the faintest echo of acknowledgement. Courtney shifted her weight, grounding the gentle motion. Daniel's movements softened further, blending awareness with intention. Caleb did not move first, he listened, sensing the flow before joining, his presence guiding rather than directing. Scarlett observed, not as a leader giving instruction, but as a thread among the tapestry of movement. There was no choreography here. Only conversation without words. The silence was not empty. It was full, alive, breathing, pulsing. After several minutes, Scarlett lifted her hand, a gentle signal to pause. The group stilled, holding the final positions quietly, as though the air itself had stopped to observe. "Good," Scarlett said softly. "This is the connection we will build from. The invisible thread. The quiet communication. The awareness of presence, not just your own, but each other's." The dancers took slow breaths, letting the understanding settle deeper. Daniel spoke first, his voice unforced. "It feels like we're learning to speak without speaking." Scarlett nodded. "Exactly. Movement is a language. And harmony is born from listening." Amina added thoughtfully. The silence felt loud, but in a good way. It was full of meaning. Courtney smiled slightly. It felt like we were moving as one body, not many. May exhaled softly, something relaxed in her posture. There was no pressure to be seen or to perform. Only to be present. Caleb's quiet voice grounded the moment. Presence is enough. And today, you were deeply present. Scarlett met each of their gazes, her expression peaceful and sure. We are building something delicate and strong. Not fast. Not flashy. But real. And that is what lasts. They spent the remaining hours refining small gestures, soft transitions, quiet pauses, shared stillness. Not rushing. Not pushing. Simply listening to what the movement wanted to become. As the sun moved lower in the sky, the golden light deepened, turning the studio warm and honey-soft. When the session ended, no one spoke immediately. There was no need. The silence itself was full of understanding. One by one, they gathered their notebooks, fabrics, and quiet reflections. One by one, they left the studio with softened expressions and steady breath. Scarlett stayed a little longer, as she always did. She stood in the center of the room and let the quiet settle over her. The connection was growing. Thread by thread. Breath by breath. Presence by presence. The performance was no longer just forming. It was living. And Scarlett understood that something rare and deeply meaningful was unfolding. Not loud. Not rushed. Not forced. Just quietly, beautifully, and completely true. The morning unfolded quietly, soft light settling like a gentle blanket across the rehearsal hall's wooden floor. There was no rush today. No push for intensity. Instead, there was a sense of collective breath, steady, warm, patient. Scarlett arrived early, as she always did, unlocking the studio and opening the windows to let the cool morning air flow in. The world outside was still waking, the sky a pale lavender. She set the music system to low volume, not to play anything yet, but simply to be ready when the moment felt right. She stood in the middle of the room, arms resting at her sides, eyes half closed, letting silence gather around her like a familiar companion. Her mind wasn't racing. Her heart wasn't heavy. She was simply open. Today's work would be about trust. Not the dramatic kind that demands proof. The quiet kind. The kind that grows like roots beneath the surface. Amina arrived first. She didn't speak immediately, but her steps already held purpose. She placed her small notebook on a bench nearby, the one filled with sketches of movement, soft arcs, layered gestures, transitions that flowed like water. "Good morning," Scarlett said softly. Amina's smile was gentle. "Morning." Scarlett could see something in her, a calm expanding where there used to be hesitation. The edges of worry that once clung to Amina's posture had softened. She was growing. And not just as an artist. As a person. Courtney entered next, holding a thin bamboo flute in her hand, not to perform, just to experiment with tone. She didn't announce this. She didn't explain. She simply placed the instrument beside the scarves she had brought yesterday and gave Scarlett a nod that said, "We will see what comes." Scarlett understood. Not everything needed shaping in advance. Sometimes, art arrived like breath, natural, inevitable. Daniel walked in with a calm presence, his shoulders relaxed, his pace unhurried. His notebook remained closed today as well. Scarlett noticed. He was beginning to understand that not all clarity comes from planning. Some clarity grows from being present enough to feel. May entered with newfound lightness. Even the way she carried her bag had changed, less guarded, more open. She greeted everyone quietly and joined the circle forming in the center of the room. There was no tension. No anxiety. No performance yet. Just arrival. And then, Caleb. He walked in without the usual pause at the threshold. He joined them not from the edge, not as an observer, but fully, intentionally, as someone who belonged. Scarlett met his eyes for only a brief moment, but the message was clear, warm, steady.
Thank you for being here. Caleb's slight nod held the reply. I trust this space.
They all stood in a loose circle now.
No music. No movement yet. Just breath.
Scarlett spoke softly, as though speaking into the quiet of early morning itself.
Today, we focus on trust. Trust in your movement. Trust in your awareness. Trust in one another.
Trust in the pause as much as the motion. Her voice carried warmth, not command. We are shaping something that cannot be forced. It must grow from sincerity. From willingness to be seen, not perfectly, just honestly. The group listened, not because they were being instructed, but because they wanted to listen.
Scarlett stepped gently into the center. Let your first movement come from your breath. Not thought. Not effort. Just breath.
The room held stillness. Then movement bloomed slowly. Amina's hand lifted, soft, curious, unhurried.
May's torso followed, like a quiet reflection of that intention. Courtney turned gently, the fabric she held trailing like soft memory. Daniel allowed his weight to shift, grounded and fluid.
Caleb waited a moment longer, listening, really listening, before stepping into motion so subtle it felt like the room itself had exhaled. There was no choreography.
Only trust.
Trust that the movement would find its shape. Trust that the group would find its shared rhythm.
Trust that presence was enough.
After a time, minutes, maybe longer, Scarlett raised her hand softly, signaling stillness. The dancers stopped, not abruptly, but like water settling into a clear pool.
No one spoke immediately.
The silence was comfortable, meaningful.
Then Scarlett said, "What we just created wasn't about steps. It was about faith. Faith in yourselves. Faith in each other.
And that faith will carry us forward, not just in performance, but in everything we do." Amina breathed out, her eyes bright with quiet realization. "I didn't feel alone in any of it," she said.
Not once. Courtney nodded softly. We were part of something shared. May's voice was gentle. It felt safe. Daniel placed a hand lightly over his chest. It felt true. Caleb spoke last, his tone steady and honest. Trust isn't loud. It's quiet.
But once it's there, you feel it everywhere.
Scarlett's smile was small, but deeply full. Yes, she said. That is exactly it.
The rest of the session unfolded slowly, with no urgency to finish, no rush to reach something grand. They explored small movements. Soft gestures. Sustained stillness.
Shared glances.
Breaths that aligned naturally. And when the sun lifted higher, filling the studio with warm gold, they closed for the day.
Not because the work was done, but because the work was becoming. And becoming cannot be hurried. When they left the studio, there were no dramatic goodbyes. Just quiet warmth, shared understanding, steady steps forward.
Scarlett remained a while longer, standing in the soft light, her palms resting lightly at her sides.
She could feel it growing, forming. The performance wasn't just choreography anymore.
It was trust made visible. And trust was a foundation stronger than anything technique could build. The next morning arrived with a quiet clarity, as though the world itself had taken a slow, thoughtful breath overnight. The sky was soft and pale, touched with hues of rose and gold. The air held that feeling of early day, fresh, open, filled with possibility. Scarlett walked toward the studio at her usual pace, a light scarf wrapped loosely around her shoulders. She had not rushed. There was no urgency in her steps, because today was not about pushing forward.
Today was about listening.
Not just to movement.
Not just to breath. But to music.
Music not as background, not as rhythm to follow, but as a presence.
A companion.
A voice that would speak with them, not to them. When Scarlett opened the doors, Courtney was already there, sitting on the floor near the window with the bamboo flute resting lightly across her lap. She was testing soft tones, gentle, almost like a whisper of wind passing between leaves. Scarlett paused at the doorway, simply listening.
The sound was delicate, but not fragile.
It carried warmth, sincerity, honesty. Scarlett smiled as she crossed the room.
You found something. Courtney nodded with a quiet certainty.
It came to me while I was walking here.
The melody isn't complicated. It's natural. Like it always existed and I just noticed it today.
Scarlett sat beside her, letting the stillness settle around them. Play it again, she said softly. Courtney raised the flute to her lips and released the melody once more. It drifted, soft and calm.
Not calling attention to itself. Not asking for applause or admiration. Simply being. A sound that welcomed breath, not effort. A sound that made space.
Scarlett closed her eyes.
Yes.
This was the voice of their performance.
Not loud, not dramatic. But deeply, quietly meaningful. One by one, the others arrived.
Amina, with her notebook tucked under her arm, approached slowly, listening as the melody filled the space.
She did not interrupt it.
She simply lowered her bag, took a seat, and let the sound guide her breathing.
May followed, settling beside Amina.
She closed her eyes and exhaled, a softness washing across her features.
It was easy to see she felt at home in this sound. Daniel entered next. His expression shifted almost immediately, not to intensity or planning, but to presence.
He placed his notebook aside again. There was no need for notes today. And Caleb arrived last, as he often did, but today his steps had a grounded steadiness.
He joined the circle without hesitation.
The room did not feel like a rehearsal space now.
It felt like a sanctuary.
A place where they came not to perform, but to understand. Scarlett rose slowly and stood in the center. Today, she said softly, we let the music guide us.
We do not shape ourselves around it. We do not force alignment. We simply listen.
And where it leads, we follow. Courtney played the melody again, but this time, she allowed it to move with breath, not perfectly rhythmic, not structured.
Just natural. The dancers didn't begin with steps.
They began with stillness.
Then, Amina's head turned slightly, following a rise in the music. May's arm floated upward, delicate as a feather's lift. Daniel shifted his weight, grounding the movement into the floor. Caleb followed, not mirroring, not repeating, responding. Like the music was asking questions.
And the movement was the answer.
Scarlett did not lead. She participated.
Her movement was not the center, but a thread among threads.
The room felt alive. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a grand way. But in a true way.
The music was not decoration.
It was connection.
After minutes of shared motion, Scarlett raised her hand gently, signaling stillness.
The final positions held, quiet and meaningful. No one spoke for a while.
The silence was not empty.
It was full of realization, of emotion, of truth.
Finally, Amina whispered, it felt like we were moving with something bigger than us.
Scarlett nodded. Music is not just sound. It is memory. It is breath. It is what connects our inner world to the outer one.
May placed a hand over her heart.
I didn't feel like I needed to do anything. The movement came on its own. Daniel exhaled, calm and thoughtful. It felt honest.
Courtney lowered the flute, her voice steady.
The music didn't tell us what to feel. It gave us space to feel.
Everyone looked to Caleb, not expecting anything, not waiting, only open.
Caleb spoke with quiet certainty. The music didn't control the movement. And the movement didn't escape the music.
They trusted each other.
And we trusted both.
Scarlett's smile was small, warm, full.
Yes, she said. This is what balance feels like.
The rest of the session unfolded gently.
They didn't rehearse large sequences. They didn't try to shape scenes.
They learned how to move with the music without losing themselves.
Not pushing. Not hiding. Just being present.
And that presence, the shared awareness, the calm, the sincerity, began weaving itself into something beautiful.
Something real. Something lasting. When the practice ended, they didn't rush to leave.
They moved slowly, calmly, with quiet smiles and soft conversations. Amina and May discussed how breath had guided their arms. Daniel and Courtney spoke about tone and gesture. Caleb quietly collected the scarves and folded them carefully. Scarlett stood near the windows, looking at the soft evening light pouring across the floor.
The performance was taking shape. Not choreographed as steps,
but grown through trust, presence, and shared voice.
They weren't just dancers and musicians and guides anymore. They were a unit.
A quiet, connected, breathing whole.
And Scarlett knew.
This was the chapter where the performance truly began to live. The next day arrived with a gentle stillness, the kind that felt like the world was listening. The studio windows were slightly fogged from the early morning cool, and soft light filtered through them in a pale golden glow. Scarlett unlocked the door as usual, her movements unhurried, familiar, grounded.
She didn't turn on the overhead lights. She let the morning light be enough.
The room felt softer that way, like the day was beginning in a whisper rather than a statement. Scarlett stood in the center, breathing quietly. She had not planned a specific exercise for today. Instead, she wanted to meet the group exactly where they were emotionally, physically, mentally. The work had reached a stage where listening mattered more than leading. Her thoughts were calm, but there was something new underneath, an awareness that the performance was beginning to form a heartbeat. And every heartbeat carried feeling. Amina arrived first, as she often did, but today she walked more slowly, as if carrying something thoughtful and delicate inside. She placed her notebook down gently and approached Scarlett. There was no tension.
No anxiety. Just something quietly questioning. Scarlett noticed it immediately.
"Are you all right?" she asked softly.
Amina nodded, her expression open and earnest. "Yes. I felt something strong yesterday. During the music work." Scarlett listened. Amina continued, her voice gentle but sincere. "It wasn't sadness. And it wasn't exactly joy. It was just a feeling of being seen. Fully. Without needing to try." Scarlett's gaze softened. "That's connection," she said. "Not the kind that is demanded. The kind that arrives when we allow ourselves to be present." Amina smiled a small, warm smile. It felt real. Scarlett nodded. It was. The others entered gradually. Courtney, carrying the flute carefully as though it were part of something alive. May, relaxed but quietly thoughtful, a subtle shift from earlier weeks. Daniel, steady and grounded, his posture less structured, more natural. And Caleb, arriving with the calm certainty of someone who no longer questioned his presence in the room. Their greetings were soft, genuine. There was no need for big expressions. The stillness itself held welcome. Scarlett guided them into a slow warm-up, not to stretch the body, but to wake it. Gentle motions. Soft breath. Movement without intention. And then, when the room felt aligned. "Today," Scarlett said, "we explore emotion not through performance, not through expression, but through awareness." No one stiffened. No one braced. They trusted her. Scarlett continued, her tone calm and steady. "Emotion in movement is not about acting. It is about allowing whatever you feel to have space, not to be displayed, but to be acknowledged." Courtney lowered her flute slightly, listening deeply. May stood with her hands relaxed at her sides, breathing slowly. Daniel's eyes lowered gently in reflection. Caleb stood in quiet readiness. And Amina felt the quiet in her chest open just a little more. Scarlett moved first. Not dramatically. Not with flourish. Just a small gesture. Her hand lifted slightly, as if reaching toward something just out of view. Not grasping. Just noticing. The group watched, not to imitate, but to understand. Scarlett spoke softly.
Emotion begins in the smallest place.
A memory. A thought. A breath.
Do not push for intensity.
Let it arrive the way morning light arrives, softly, slowly, naturally. She stepped back. Now you try.
The room did not fill with movement all at once. It began with quiet.
Amina closed her eyes.
Her chest rose slightly, a gentle breath. Then, her hand lifted, not like Scarlett's, not like anyone's, her own gesture, small and honest. May moved next, her shoulders softening, her head tilting just slightly, as though hearing a distant voice. Daniel grounded his weight into his feet, then allowed his spine to lengthen, his breath deepening into calm.
Courtney didn't move at first.
Instead, she raised her flute and played one soft note, only one.
A note that felt like memory.
The room stilled around the sound. And Caleb, he watched for a moment longer than the rest.
Not from hesitation.
From care. Then he stepped into the movement with a gesture so simple, just the turning of his wrist, that it felt like a quiet doorway opening into something real.
Scarlett watched. Not directing. Witnessing.
What she saw was not performance. It was truth. After a long, gentle stretch of time, Scarlett signaled stillness. The dancers held their final positions quietly, letting the moment settle before allowing their bodies to return to neutral.
No one spoke at first. The silence was warm.
Then May whispered, her voice soft.
It's surprising how much feeling comes when you don't try to find it. Daniel nodded slightly. It shows up when we stop pushing. Courtney placed the flute in her lap.
The emotion was already there.
We just gave it space. Amina's voice was thoughtful, steady. It felt peaceful. Not overwhelming. Just honest. Caleb's words were simple, but full. There is strength in quiet emotion.
Scarlett's eyes softened with quiet pride.
Yes, she said. Emotion doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. Stillness can speak as clearly as movement. The rest of the practice unfolded gently, less like training, more like deepening understanding. They didn't add new choreography. They didn't refine steps.
They learned how to feel without forcing.
How to express without performing. How to let silence speak alongside movement.
As the session ended, the afternoon sunlight filled the room in a warm, golden glow.
No one rushed to leave.
Their breaths were slow.
Their bodies calm. Their hearts steady.
Something had shifted today.
Not something dramatic. Something subtle. But unmistakable.
A question had been asked, not through words, but through movement.
Can we allow ourselves to be seen gently, without fear?
And the answer, slowly forming, was
yes. In this space, yes. The following day, the studio felt different even before anyone arrived.
The air held a warmth that wasn't tied to temperature, but to memory, like the walls themselves had begun to absorb the quiet trust that had grown inside them.
It was subtle, but real. The floorboards no longer echoed with the sharpness of new practice. Instead, they carried the softness of shared understanding.
Scarlett entered just as the morning light was settling across the studio floor, long bands of gold stretching toward the center of the room. She paused, allowing a few breaths to pass. She felt the space, not as a place to work, but as a place that knew them now. She traced her fingertips gently along the wooden railing near the mirror, not inspecting, not judging, just acknowledging. A space becomes meaningful when it holds what people allow themselves to feel inside it. And this space had begun to hold so much.
Amina was first to arrive. She walked in without the hesitancy she once carried.
Her notebook was still with her, but she did not clutch it. It rested loosely in her hand, familiar, not protective. She greeted Scarlett with a soft, peaceful smile.
"Morning." Scarlett returned the smile. "Morning. How are you feeling today?" Amina considered the question not as something to be answered quickly, but thoughtfully. "Centered," she said quietly. "Like something has settled." Scarlett nodded. Then today, we listen to that.
Amina took her place in the studio and began settling into gentle stretching, the kind done not to prepare the body, but to invite it to be present. May arrived next, her steps light and easy. She hummed softly under her breath, not a song exactly, more the sound someone makes when they are comfortably connected to their own thoughts. She joined Amina, and the two stretched side by side, not speaking, not planning, just sharing space.
Once, this silence might have felt awkward. Now, it felt full.
Daniel entered, calm as always, but today there was an ease to him that had not been there before. His shoulders rested more naturally. His jaw had softened.
His attention wasn't sharp or analytical, it was open.
He nodded to the group and began to warm his body slowly, his breath deep and even. Courtney came in with the bamboo flute in one hand, but her steps suggested she wasn't certain whether she would play today.
Not out of doubt, only awareness.
Music, she had learned, must come when it wants to, not when someone calls for it. She placed the flute gently on a low bench and sat beside it, letting her breath settle. Caleb arrived last, as he often did, but the timing no longer felt like distance.
It felt intentional. He walked into the studio and joined the group without hesitation. There was nothing guarded about his posture now. Just presence.
Scarlett moved into the center, speaking softly.
Today is not about adding. Or achieving. Or shaping something new.
The group listened, not with anticipation, but with stillness.
Today, we remember. Not memories of the past.
But the memories our bodies carry from this process. She breathed in slowly.
This room remembers us. And we remember each other. There was no dramatic shift in the room, only a deeper quiet.
Scarlett continued.
Begin by standing. No movement. No direction. Just presence. Let yourselves feel the history of the work we've done here.
The dancers stood in a loose circle.
Feet grounded. Breath steady. Eyes soft.
The silence gently expanded, warm, calm, familiar. Scarlett said only one word.
Listen. Not to sound. Not to music. But to the room.
To the subtle traces of every breath shared.
Every moment of understanding. Every gesture. Every pause. And slowly. Movement began. Not planned. Not prompted. May's fingers lifted slightly, like greeting the air. Amina's shoulders softened into a gentle curve. Daniel shifted his weight slowly, grounding deeper.
Courtney breathed in a way that made the eyelids flutter, not dramatic, just sincere. Caleb moved with a quiet steadiness, a gesture so small, yet full of intention. And the room held it all. Scarlett watched, not directing, only witnessing.
There was nothing to fix. Nothing to correct. Nothing to push. This was the work. Not performance. Not rehearsal. Connection in motion.
The kind that could not be forced because it already lived within them. After some time, long enough for the movement to expand and then settle, Scarlett lifted her hand. The dancers eased into stillness. No abrupt stop. Just a settling. Like water becoming still after a ripple. No one spoke for several breaths. Then Courtney, with quiet certainty, picked up the flute and played a single, gentle tone. Soft.
Warm. Unrushed.
A tone that sounded like reflection. Scarlett closed her eyes.
Yes. The room remembered them. And now, they were remembering the room. When practice ended, it didn't feel like something was closing. It felt like something was continuing quietly, steadily, without ceremony. They gathered their things softly.
Their movements were unhurried.
Their expressions warm. Amina and May exchanged a gentle smile.
Daniel rested his hand briefly on the railing before leaving, acknowledging the space. Courtney lingered near the window, letting light touch her face. Caleb paused at the door, not because he didn't want to leave, but because he understood the value of acknowledging the moment before stepping out of it. Scarlett remained behind, just as she always did. She stood in the studio's center and breathed in the quiet.
This place was no longer just a room. It was a living memory of their growth.
And the performance was no longer something being built.
It was something becoming itself.